Clic, mort. Ça tue, ça blesse, ça flingue. Hey, hey, hey.
Welcome back to the latest episode, the newest episode of the BME podcast, the best sports podcast in New Jersey. For those that are listening, we have a guest on another episode, a conversation with Tone. Omar Zahran is in the building. For those that do not know, this man is very, very well written, well read when it comes to his articles. He's on Medium, he's on Substack, wherever you want to find him. He's on Threads, he's on Instagram, pretty much all sports. He is able to talk on it and actually have an educated input and viewpoint on these topics. How are you doing tonight?
Hey Tone, thank you for having me, man. And very nice words that you have for somebody who just throws words together on the keyboard. But I've wanted to be on your show for a long time, so I'm glad we were ringing in the new year and able to make this happen.
I'm glad we are able to make it happen too. I was even looking at the other day. Again, this is why I said it. I like some of your articles that you have written that I've actually been able to read. Especially it was one you were talking about the aspect which a lot of people don't think about this, but that player that goes back to his hometown and how that could sometimes be good, sometimes be bad. It all depends on the player, the situation.
Can I tell a story about that article? So to give you guys an idea of how ridiculous my mind operates when it comes to this stuff, we were watching season 5 of Stranger Things, right? The first drop that happened around Christmas time, and we were watching it, and there was this scene. It was the smallest scene. It's super insignificant in the show, so I could spoil the scene where these two security guards were debating Steve Alford and Reggie Miller from back in the 80s when the Pacers decided to draft Miller instead of Alford, who was like the local, grew up in Indiana, set records, played at IU, the whole thing. And I'm watching the show, trying to focus on the show. I'm just like, man, this would be a really good article idea, and so like I jotted it off to the side to explore it later, and that was a fun one to write, man. So I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, because that's the part I enjoy with it too, is that the aspect that you brought in Stranger Things, and that's kind of what inspired the whole conversation for you to write the article, which I think is dope. For somebody that is in the business and has talked to many of athletes, coaches, I just want to ask, this was not on the rundown, but it kind of happened recently, and I did see you post on Threads that you had some thoughts on it. What were your thoughts on Lynn Jones Turpin and how she handled after the press conference, talking to the Jags coach and encouraging him? There was a lot of it's people on both sides. Some people hated it, some people said it was cool. What was your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so the way I got apprised of that whole situation was I'm in this Slack group chat for Knicks Fan TV, who I contribute to as a writer, and they were kind of talking about it. So I looked at it, I was like, oh, okay, and there was a lot of New York media guys. I think Ian Begley was kind of going in on it about how it's not journalistic practice and you shouldn't be doing this, blah blah blah. And for me, I looked at it as easy for you when you're Ian Begley, established in the New York media market, which is super competitive, to be able to say that you got to be, you got to go straight and narrow. But we're talking about a market that has one pro team in Jacksonville. They really don't have much in the way of, I don't think, of college presence. In terms of like college football or college basketball. And there's Jacksonville State or whatever, uh, but then she was kind of like I thought, to me it was like the story. The story is, this is a franchise that's been in the gutter for the better part of 2 decades, right? This is a franchise that everybody laughs at, that everybody kind of, just shit if I can curse on your show, but just just kind of everybody dumps on them, right? And so it was just kind of like, hey, you did a great job. This is your, it's onwards and upwards. And I think there's a story about Lee and Cohen as a rebirth when it comes to that. So a lot of people, they're like, well, she has to have this journalistic integrity. And I was like, hold on, wait a minute. We have somebody here who is a columnist, and then I later learned that she doesn't even cover the Jags. She covers other stuff, for that paper in Jacksonville. So it's not like she's a beat reporter covering the Jags every single week, right? If she was, I could understand that. And then there's the other critique, which is, well, why not say that to him on the side? Why not be in the press conference? To me, we're in the new media landscape, man. Like, you and I both have podcasts. we are able to kind of pick up a mic and start talking and making interviews happen. It's totally different. It's not as gate kept as it used to be, and it's all about relationships. And she was kind of expressing her relationship that she had built with Liam Cohen in this year. And I didn't have a problem with it. And I think a lot of people that did are a little bit out of touch with the realities of media now, which is totally different. And the other angle is a lot of people look at it as like you look at how bigger media institutions have been kind of monopolized and influenced by government interests and stuff, and that's the other aspect. And then this is the what you want to be mad about. So I thought it was kind of BS that people were getting all up in arms about it. To me, initially, I was like, "What's a cool moment?" It's like an auntie just kind of, was just saying like, "Good job, man. I'm proud of you, whatever." And I didn't think it was a huge deal, but a lot of people are up in arms about it.
I think that I agree with you because I think is some of that is needed, and maybe it wasn't the space and the time, but they just lost. It wasn't going to be another press conference that she was probably going to be able to attend to give him that encouragement. And it's just after a loss. Who knows what that did for him mentally, emotionally, physically? Of like, yo, you got to take a step back. Like, we did have a successful season. Nobody expected us to win this many games, to be in this position. Like you said, Jacksonville, when I played in the ABA, we went down to Jacksonville for a tournament. Ain't much down there. Is
Right.
sports wise, it is not much down there. They love their Jaguars. So for them to be in this position, of course you wanted to go farther, but it was a successful season from where they was at. So I didn't think it was that big of a deal. It's not like she just did it multiple times throughout the season. The one time, it wasn't that serious. For you, being that you circumvent and navigate between multiple sports, where did that love for sports actually originate?
Um, I want to say it's weird because like a lot of people they get it passed down, right? Like a parent or like a sibling or something passes it down. For me, it kind of was that way. My dad he kind of got really into the NBA in the late '80s and early '90s with the Bad Boy Pistons and the Chicago Bulls. Now, granted, we grew up in New York City, so it's like why didn't you like the Knicks? But whatever. And so he would tell me stories about like the Isaiah Thomas swollen ankle game in the finals against the Lakers, and he would tell me stories about Jordan in the early '90s. Obviously I was way too young to experience the first three-peat, and it got me interested into basketball. And growing up in New York City, you are almost indoctrinated into basketball right away. There's parks everywhere, hoops everywhere, people always playing ball. So it's a institution in the city. So that really gravitated me towards the NBA. And then as time went on, I kind of picked up football. I had like friends that got into playing like pee wee football and that sort of thing. And I started following the NFL, and it just became a love for me from there. I think a lot of my style is dictated on that original moment because my dad wasn't telling me, "Hey, Isaiah Thomas scored a bunch of points in the fourth quarter." My dad was telling me, "This dude had a swollen ankle; he could barely walk." Right, and it was just incredible. It's this feat of excellence that you just don't really see, and he framed it in that way, and that's kind of the approach I take to writing about sports. And when I had moved to Jordan overseas to finish high school, and when I moved back, I moved to Detroit, and I got super involved in sports talk radio at the time. This is like 2005, 2006, and I got kind of really found the way it was so engaging to me, and that was kind of like the podcast before the podcast sort of thing, and I just found it super interesting. The way the stories you could tell in sports, the variety of personalities that are there. And I always felt that sports like is this great unifying thing because think about even if you look at it politically or whatever, there's people from all different aspects. They grew up conservative, grew up liberal, white, black, Hispanic, doesn't matter, right? It's just like, but they're all kind of coalescing into this one thing. I think there's something beautiful about that, and it has intrigued me ever since, man. And I've always been a huge fan. I didn't start writing about sports initially. I started writing about technology, and then eventually kind of got into sports, mainly because it was a a conflict of interest for me to write about tech because my day job is in tech. So
Ah,
yeah. So I could share the story now. I was on a program with Motorola, the cell phone company, and my firm rule was if I rep a brand, if I'm working for a brand, I don't write about the brand. That's like a firm line in the sand that I draw. And so I would write about other phone companies, right? And one post I did was about a Chinese manufacturer, OnePlus. They had like this super fast charging tech that nobody else was competing with at the time. I was like, they need to lead into this and to really hone in on that messaging. Somebody from Motorola saw it. They're like, well, you're glorifying the competition. This is no good, And so I was like, you know what? I'm tired of dealing with this. I'm just gonna make a pivot. And I went into sports. And honestly, it's the best decision that I made. Best thing that could have happened to me. So well, I wouldn't be here talking with you if I didn't make that decision, for example, So
Nah, that's dope. The transition and the pivot that you had to make there, because like you said, that's the day job. We don't want to mess that up. So
right,
yeah, if
100%.
y'all want me to stop writing about that, all right, cool. I'll stop writing about it. For you, something that you mentioned within that though is that the way that your pops framed it was not so much again the statistics, not the analytics and the box score, is what he saw and the grit that he saw from Isaiah Thomas, and the fact that he was able to use the adrenaline or whatever. Somehow he was able to do that game that is exuded in your writing.
Mhm.
Why for you do you think that it is important to kind of give the full perspective and the full scope of sports when you write than just the statistical aspect?
Yeah, I think we have this thing now where we don't like when a lot of people don't like when people editorialize stuff. Like you're trying to say too much or do too much. But for me, like I grew up in the days of ESPN the magazine and Sports Illustrated, ESPN Page Two, Grantland, all that stuff that was kind of going super long form and really exploring a deeper concept. Because yeah, it's cool to say. I'm mentioning this guy's name because I'm thinking about writing an article about him. It's just cool to say, yeah, Rudy Gobert had 3 blocks tonight and 10 points and 12 rebounds, right? But what's the deeper thing to me is just kind of uncovering beyond that layer because everybody could talk about accounting stat or your advanced metrics or this. To me, sports, like I said earlier, is really all storytelling. So I want to be able to tell that story, and I think that I don't know if you've ever dabbled in this tone, but like a lot of these sports media outlets that you have now, it's a lot of clickbait, right? And it's a lot of wow, this former NBA All-Star said this, and it's really a guy who's like a Nick Batum, it's like a really irrelevant at this point in his career, but they just want you to click to drive ad revenue. And I've worked for a couple of companies like that they say, hey, here's the topic, 500 words, bang it out. And it's just like, there's no nuance, there's no depth to it. And I just felt like there's, I feel like I can't be the only one who wants just like a thoughtful analytical piece. And I think back to like before when I would just read stuff. It doesn't have to be sports, it could be anything. Where I read something and I was like, man, that is a really good point. That really helped me think about this topic, whatever the topic might be. And sometimes that happens in podcasts, sometimes it happens in books. I still think with writing, it's there. And I think a lot of people in sports have kind of cast it aside and said that it doesn't work anymore. Everybody says, well, you got to do short form video only. People don't have attention spans. I don't know. Maybe I just believe more in people than than others do, but I think there's room for that. And when you talk about an event that happened, a lot of times you talk about it in a way of that it's almost like a movie scene. You're setting the stage, right? You could just say, "Oh, Michael Jordan did a crossover on Byron Russell and hit a 20-foot jumper." Like, no, you got to explain the context, right? Like, this is what was leading up to it, right? And so that's kind of the what drives me is to kind of talk about things in a way that people just aren't talking about. And I think that we kind of have fallen victim to like debate culture. And like the thing that annoys me the most in the NBA is like GOAT debates, right? That always annoys me because like that was kind of like the bread and butter of what like First Take did, right? And Undisputed did. And I just like I just feel like there's more. There's an intelligent space for a conversation to be had, and that's what I pursue.
I completely agree, and I understand where people are coming from because, as you know, on the podcasting side, and if you dabble into any of the video aspect of it, of putting out clips and things of that nature, people, unfortunately, on the mass media, and I'm sure you've seen this
Mhm.
in general, a lot of people don't have the attention spans, but also don't have the reading comprehension. They come into a topic, they see the topic is about Michael Jordan, and they already have the answer in their head. They're not even reading to actually get the context. So I think the thing is, with it comes to that, is like finding that good medium and balance. Because I get the higher ups, they want to make money, like you said, the ad revenue. So I get that it needs to be that balance, and having that, I think the best people and the best, journalists, the best content creators, the best podcasters mix in both. All right, I'm gonna make sure I have that piece for you, and just understanding, at least I can see on my side, when I put the clips that have more context of the take, does it do as well? Not so much. But there are people, like you said, there's a space where there's people that then it creates conversation. Oh, okay. I see why he thinks XYZ, because
Right.
he came with this and this was the mindset behind it. I think we do need to have more of that and make it more of a norm, so it's not where it's like even the higher ups can see and understand, like, no, there's a place for this.
Yeah.
We need to have that. That can make money as well, because there is a space of people that have it. That's why you see when Mind the Game drop, everybody, oh my gosh, yes, it is great. And then I think of, there's people like Omar where you could get Mind the Game weekly anyway from Omar, but
Yeah.
people don't see it on the mass media, and it's not the popular thing. I do hope and think that it is coming back to a point where we have that journalistic and the storytelling that is needed, and that's some of the best people in entertainment and creation is the ones that could tell a story. For you, growing up, all the different avenues and different things that you read growing up, sports and non-sports, for you, when it comes to your writing and your storytelling, who were some people that inspire you, or even now still inspire you, that you draw inspiration from when it comes to your storytelling and writing?
Yeah, so the first one's gonna surprise people. It always surprises people when I tell them this. One of a big influence on my writing style is actually Colin Cowherd, which a lot of people are surprised by that because a lot of people hate him, And like I told a friend of mine about it, and he was like, "Well, you're way better than him," blah blah blah. And I'm like, "The guy has a show for a reason." But Colin does a lot of these analogies and real life anecdotes, when he's trying to make his point. And I think I do that as well. You see that in my writing. I love Miran Fader a lot. And so she's done biographies about Giannis and Hakeem Olajuwon. And she's currently working on one about Larry Bird. And I just really like her approachable style, and like she really digs into the life story. Like it's no surprise that she was pulled by stories about two guys who were foreign born, unlikely success stories in the NBA in Giannis and Olajuwon. And so I've always felt her presence and somebody that I really admire a lot. From the non-sports side, I've always liked this guy. He does YouTube actually. He used to write for Pocket Now. His name is Michael Fisher. And so he goes by Mr. Mobile on YouTube. And one thing I like about him is that after a while in tech YouTube, the LeBron James GOAT debate version in that space is talking about the iPhone, right? If you talk about Apple, you generally are going to get views, you're going to get clicks, people are going to comment because a lot of people like Apple. And he kind of said, you know what, I want to talk about stuff that I like. So he like leaned into foldable screens and just weird tech stuff. And I was just like, I respect that, and I like his. Again, he does that same type of real world narrative type voice, and so he's another one for me. And lastly, I would say another tech one is Nilay Patel, who is the editor in chief of The Verge, and they're obviously a pretty well known tech blogging website, but he has a kind of sort of style that's really rooted in the ethics of his journalism. He has principles and he sticks to them. I've always respected that, and he's really just trying to get dive to the point. Like, if I'm interviewing you and you're kind of evading my question, I'm gonna dial into it until you answer the question. An example was Substack had an issue a while ago where the CEO and the company were kind of allowing hate speech to be posted on the platform, and they weren't doing anything about it. And he was like, "So, are you going to platform this in the future?" And then he started kind of dancing around the question. He's like, "No, you didn't answer my question." And I respect that a lot. People who kind of stick to their guns and really try to tell the story of what's really happening as opposed to just accepting PR fluff. But yeah, those are some influences. I I like to listen to a lot of podcasts. Like Zach Lowe is a guy I love, and just the way he sees the game and the way he can talk about it is just really good. And but yeah, that's just kind of like a small amount of the influences. And so with all the writing, reading, listening that I do, you kind of pick up a little bit from everybody. But that's just kind of those are the ones that kind of come to mind.
That's like you just said, you pick up from everybody, because I heard somebody say this the other day that is a poet turned rapper. She was saying that people that ask, how can I become a better lyricist? She says the best way you become a better lyricist, and if you're in the poet space, is becoming well read.
Yeah.
The more you read, the better you are at writing. And I feel that's the same way across the board with writing, and then with podcasting. The more podcasts you listen to of people that's successful, that know what they're talking about, or at least want to go in the same vein that you want to go in, a Zach Lowe. Even when I hear the Bomani Joneses of the world, even when I hear his podcast and others like that, where it gives, also because they were journalists, so it gives some of the journalistic side to it. They're giving more of the story. And even though sometimes, which is where I know a lot of people lack when it comes to the podcast aspect, is it's so video based now.
Right.
I can listen to Bomani Jones, the Dominique Foxworth, so Zach Lowe, and I can see what they're talking about.
Real quick about Bomani, and that was on me for not mentioning him. One thing I love his show. It's so Mondays. It's one of the first shows that I listen to is The Right Time with Bomani. And what I've always loved about him is that he has a way of interweaving cultural things that he has experienced, and into the conversation. Like he has episodes about rap albums all the time. I love that. It's great. And it's something for me that I always kind of have something in the back of my mind. So he's a definite influence, and that was my bad for not mentioning it because I love Bomani. He does great work.
That's the thing where I like that, to your point of what you mentioned. When we get into journalism and podcasting and YouTube, some experts say just focus on one thing. But as humans, there's not many humans, maybe you've met them, there's not many humans that I've met that's only interested in one thing. I only like Italian food. They don't nothing else. They don't eat anything. They don't eat anything else. So Bomani and people like that is like inspired me. It's like, no, if I want to talk about movies, I'm gonna talk about, let's have an episode about movies. Let's have an episode about music. Let's have an episode about this, and just be able to have those conversations. So I think that's important to do so, because that's who we are as humans.
Right.
In the space though, with sports podcasting and everything, people wanting video and the shorter clips, and you being in the journalistic space and being someone that still actually writes, for you, how has like the influx of the sports podcasting impacted negatively or positively the actual art of journalism?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that this new landscape is really social media forward, right? So you kind of have to be present on social media in addition to your writing stuff. And honestly, I mean, this current landscape is why I started doing a podcast. Like, not everything is going to work as an article. Sometimes you just want to kind of get into having a conversation about something. And I think that right now it's a landscape that we have. It's never been easier to start doing something, but what the lesson you quickly learn is that what gets rewarded today is consistency, right? And it's not necessarily spamming people with an episode every day or an article every day or something, but it's just consistently showing up and doing that. Like, I think about, like, most popular sports podcast out is probably like the Bill Simmons podcast, right? And he's regularly posting 2-3 times a week, and he's being present on that platform. And I think that it gives you a lot to glean from, a lot to aspire to. And now it does also put pressure, because sometimes you have to I'd be like, well, I gotta get something out because the news cycle is so fast, right? Like think about like the NFL playoffs just happened this weekend, right? You had this great comeback from the Bears against the Packers on Saturday, and the time frame to really dive into the Caleb Williams conversation about that is so finite because we're already on to the next thing. Like we got a Monday night game tonight, and in the playoffs, and that's going to be the topic of conversation. So things move so quickly, so you kind of have to act fast. And for me, it's a weird place for me to be in because as somebody that writes on Medium, that platform rewards evergreen content, right? So something that can be brought back, which is why you'll see I don't really write as much anymore about things that just happened and what it means, right? Because I want somebody in 2, 3 months to stumble upon that article in the algorithm and be like, oh yeah, this is let me read this. This seems relevant right now. And that's kind of the tug and pull that you're fighting with timeliness versus wanting to kind of put out something good because sometimes really good work, especially if it's not your full-time job, it takes time, right? Like you were talking about that Hometown Heroes one that took me over like a week and a half to kind of put together just the ideas and the concepts and before I really kind of pieced it all together. And like what people don't think about that stuff is it's easy to say, "Oh yeah, you can just pull up all these numbers and stuff from the internet, and it's readily available," which it is. But you have to kind of parse it and interpret it and do all that stuff, and that's kind of where I think a lot of people think it's super easy to do. And the best example I have from that is somebody saw me my by like following on Medium and relative success I've had, and they're like, "Oh, I want to do this too. How do you do it?" And I told them, like, "This is what you do. And you just gotta be consistent in post." And he wrote 2 articles or something, didn't get the traction he wanted, and abandoned it forever. And that's the lesson to me is like you consistency and staying at it is what gets rewarded. Like I've recorded almost 100 episodes of my podcast, and I don't have brand deals or anything like that, but I've seen a recent uptick in viewership because I kept at it. And that's kind of the lesson here. It's the pace of it all, but also just that nothing is rewarded more than consistency.
That's the thing that I tell my wife all the time when trying to explain it because she's not really into sports. But
Right.
try to explain that, and to anybody that asks, is that balance of literally, like you just said, I think is a lot of meat left on the bone to talk about that Bears game on both sides. Caleb Williams, Jordan Love, Matt LaFleur. You could really dive into multiple ways. But then you have the very next day, even more good football. And then they forget that now we're talking about Caleb Williams matching up with the next team.
Right.
I think that is one of the most difficult things that people don't think about in this space when you are not the Foxes of the world, where you don't have the backing of a Bill Simmons podcast or Ryan Russillo.
Hmm.
They have a whole team. So when that thing drops, they could record that night. It could be out the next morning and it's still relevant to that.
Right.
And like you said, the evergreen content is what I was just about this with Rush and Jarrett. Like,
Hmm.
that's more of the content that I want to try to create. That way is mixed in regardless. Like, all right, cool. I didn't get the 30-second reel out of talking about Caleb Williams. But in that episode, we have evergreen content. So somebody will come back and watch that episode at any point because there's something in there that's evergreen, which, yeah, a lot of people don't really think about that. And like you said, some people just thinks it's just easy. You just open your laptop, you just start typing.
Right.
It's a lot more into that for you, right? In your process. And you said you feel you had the little success you've had so far. Outside looking in, obviously you're the person doing the work. I feel it's a little bit more than little success you've had. What would you equate to your success, and what do you think, in your opinion, is what's needed to be a successful journalist and podcaster?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that I try my best to present angles that somebody didn't think about. And a lot of times there's a topic I was like, okay, is this something I want to pursue? Yes, and a lot of it just happens, just like you see a social media post that makes you think about something, and I mentioned the Rudy Gobert thing that kind of crossed my mind. It literally came to my mind right before we started recording. And I'll just kind of clue in on that. So, you know, I look at Rudy Gobert, and you see an accomplished NBA player who's made multiple All Star teams, All Defense, Defensive Player of the Year. When you look at his Hall of Fame resume, eventually, it's it's going to be hard to deny it from accolades alone. But there's a lot of people who disagree with him being a Hall of Famer, right? But I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about this the other day, which kind of led to this moment where it kind of clicked in my mind earlier, which was, okay, well, why is it? And why is it that everybody's so critical? It can't be perimeter defense only when Luka is matched up against him, right? It has to be something. And I thought back, I was like, you know what? It probably roots back to him touching the mics during COVID, right? And I was like, huh, what an interesting thing to pursue about how one moment defined a man's career, right? And that's the angle I think about. And I think a lot of people maybe don't think in that way, or there's just more sense of urgency to talk about, like, oh, what's his defensive rating on these type of actions, right? A lot of people are focused on that stuff, which is great. I think you mentioned this earlier. There's so many angles to take, and that just happens to be my angle. As far as being successful, I think the most successful people, sports or otherwise, are the people that have a unique voice, right? And that's it's why, like you talked about Bill Simmons and Ryan Russillo. Russillo is he kind of has, what you're getting from a Russillo monologue, right? And because and that's what people love. People It resonates with people, and they love that. I think about a political influencer, Suzanne Lambert, who I follow on Threads, and she has this um Mean Girls vibe from like the movie, and she kind of like really embraces that persona, right? Of being intelligent but also capable of talking shit. And that's been super successful for her. And I think that in this day and age, you kind of have to have a little bit of a unique voice that people want to hear. For me, I think it's more so about uh, I want to have an intelligent conversation about something, right? And I want to present it intelligent. Like one thing, a rule I have, generally speaking. Like sometimes I have some exceptions, but generally speaking, I never post about a game until the game's over, because one, you that's how you end up on old takes exposed, but or freezing cold takes or whatever. And two, though, it's just like the totality of what has happened hasn't been figured out yet. Like you talk about like the Patriots Chargers game yesterday. Through about three quarters, you would say, "Wow, Drake May is really lucky that his defense is playing so good, right?" But then he made some plays later on, and then it's a little bit different. Like, yeah, he made just enough plays to overcome it. So him not making any plays and being carried by his defense is a much different story than made plays when they needed it, right? And so that's the framing. And so I think for me, it's really just having a thoughtful conversation about stuff, and not just the thing I hate is just like I'm just throwing out a take to throw a take out, right? And a lot of people do that, and that sometimes gets engagement, but I always feel like that's temporary. You want to be looked at as an institution in some way. You want to be looked at as, I go to Tone because he says this in this way, right? That's what I think is really what it's all about. And I think about, you've had him on your show before, our friend Griffin Prock. Griffin's just kind of like a temperature gauger type of guy, I think, right? Where you're just like, hey, this happened, da 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 da. What do you guys think? Let's have a conversation. And so Griff's the conversation guy, and that's why he's been so successful on Threads. And I think that when you establish yourself in a certain type of lane, then sky's the limit. And we've seen that with a lot of people that we follow on Threads and have collaborated with in the way that they kind of approach it. When you kind of define it for yourself, and that's when the success happens, I think.
I think that is all facts and vital because, again, I've had this conversation with my wife. Starting the podcast that I started, I have co-host, and now I'm like, I need to find my own voice. It's been a lot of the behind the scenes. So everything you're saying is facts and something that I completely agree with. It's like you need to have your own unique voice and what is coming from you. What are you representing? What people get when all right, I know when I see Omar, this is what I'm gonna get. I know when I see Griff, this is what I'm gonna get. I'm definitely in that position currently right now, trying to figure out what my voice is
It's hard,
outside of
right? Like, it's hard, because like
difficult.
you only way you figure it out is by doing it. Like for in the podcasting space, a while ago I had a Knicks podcast I did with a couple of friends of mine from Europe. We're in this group chat about the Knicks, and we would just do weekly episodes recapping the week and storylines, whatever. It was cool, but it wasn't what I really wanted to do. And then there was an episode I had where I did it by myself because they were both on like vacation or something, weren't able. And I had interviewed the producer of another Knicks podcast, and we were just talking about the content formula, what do you got to do? And we were just getting real deep into just like how the sausage is made, so to speak, right? And I was like, wow, I need to be doing more of this, right? And eventually, like when I moved out to the West Coast, it just became untenable to continue that podcast, so we kind of just stopped doing it. But then I got the itch again. I was like, I want to do my own thing, but I kind of want to do it my way. And I've been able to have conversations about women's sports, about youth sports, about just the culture around sports with a bunch of cool guests and everything. And it's like I had a conversation about sports and AI with an AI founder a while ago, and that's something I would have never dreamed of doing. But when you figure out your voice and carve out the lane of what you want to do, I'll admit this: I get like PR companies emailing me relatively frequently saying, "Hey, this guest might be really good for your show. I listened to this episode. And that's the validation, right? We're like, yeah, it's working because I'm trying to have a deeper conversation. I'm trying to have just beyond just let's recap the game stuff, and people see that, and eventually they gravitate towards it and they respect the work.
That's extremely dope that they're reaching out. Like you said, that gives a sense of a validation because I'm sure you already know that you are doing good work and having that peace within yourself. Like, this is what I want to create. I'm doing that. Whatever comes with it outside of that. Completely agree, because that's how I feel about one. That's why I like to try to do as many of these interviews as possible. Because this, I know, like you said, I love this aspect more than actually the regular daily show that we have. I like this more, talking to athletes, talking to journalists, talking to people behind the scenes, and getting their story and breaking down how they view sports and how they view this walk of life and this medium of life. So I completely agree. I think we need more of that. Like, it's back to kind of what we've been saying this whole episode. Like, give us more in-depth, intelligent, fruitful conversations that people can, for me, my mindset, and I'm sure you think the same, even on the sports level, that can impact lives net positively. I made you laugh. I made you think. I inspired you. You felt motivated listening to Omar talk about this. That is the good part that I get out of it. As you mentioned, you had a Knicks podcast, so I want to transition to talking about some Knicks. Who do you feel on the Knicks like their narrative needs to be re-examined, looked at again, gone more in depth, because it might be misunderstood, maybe it's not talked about enough? What Knicks player comes to mind for you in that regard?
I have two, if that's okay. So the first one, it's kind of a cop out, I guess. I'm going to talk about their two star players here, but Jalen Brunson, the narrative or reputation that he has that he's this foul baiter, I don't. I understand that people have seen certain play styles of him and see him as that type of a player, but I really feel like this year, especially under Mike Brown, he's kind of dialed that back quite a bit. I think he's outside of the top 20 in free throw attempts, but people just have this vision of him as this, Trey Young type thing. And also, I think the way we talk about the whole free throw merchant thing, which kind of originated with James Harden. A quick aside, I am endlessly fascinated by James Harden. No player in the modern NBA interests me more than James Harden. If I were to ever
Agreed.
write a sports book, it would be about James Harden. Okay, because I find him as just kind of this weird representation of like the millennial generation, in the sense of, like he's forced his way out, the Houston fat suit, it just, but he also revolutionized the way offense was played in that heliocentric style. You don't have SGA or Luca even without James Harden, right? I just find that him super interesting. But back to the original point is the foul baiting Brunson thing. I think it's tremendously overstated. And even though like part of being a great scorer is getting to the line. Like you find any MVP and try to tell me they weren't getting to the line all the time. Jordan got to the line all the time, right? Like that was his thing. And I just feel like people, because it's so hard to stop. It's like SGA is a great example of that. It's so hard to stop with the array of moves that he has. And I think people just get frustrated by it. And it's annoying, for other fan bases, so guys just continue to score on you. But I feel like the foul baiting thing for Brunson is a little overstated. The other thing is Karl Anthony Towns, and I think there's this reputation that he's soft around the league. Everybody just gets real problematic with when they're trying to insinuate certain things about him, like he has a certain femininity to him, and even if he did, who cares? Like this is one of the best shooting big men we've ever seen. Like I don't care about that. I don't care that his voice changes during an interview. Like who cares? I think that if you watch him, like when I watch him a lot in Minnesota because I'm watching the Knicks all the time, so you only get to see the other teams, but so frequently. But when I'm watching him every single game here in New York, this guy wants to win. He's tough. He's sacrificing his body. He's doing this stuff, and I think like there's this thing where people are like, oh, you should trade him for Anthony Davis, before the latest AD injury, and I was just kind of like, could we not? Like this guy, he gets up off the mat. He's dealt with injury. This is one of the toughest Knicks I've ever seen in terms of a perseverance type thing, and the way he's treated. I really don't like it because I think he's one of the more skilled players I've watched in a Knicks uniform in my lifetime, and because with between the shooting and the passing ability and the vision that he has, and is he incredibly frustrating to watch with the fouls? Of course, but he is, I think, a lot tougher than people make him out to be, and you could tell he's one of those guys who he got to New York and he's like, I want to win here, and not to say that he didn't want to win in Minnesota because I'm sure he did, but you could tell him being from New Jersey, and being of the area, he's watched the team when he was growing up, and you could tell it means a little bit more to him than maybe like an OG Anunoby who didn't grow up in that atmosphere, and so yeah, it's just a narrative about Cat that I never like. And again, the whole like people just kind of cast aspersions on him about the way he acts or whatever. It's just kind of, I just felt like it's always been tremendously unfair. I can't hear you, Mike Tone.
Two great points right there. It's a lot shared within that. The aspect of, I think people sometimes when it comes to that, it's frustrating, but you got to remember it's a skill to get to the free throw line. Like going back to James Harden, he studied, all right, if I put the ball, hang it low, lift my arms up, going down to the paint, it's more than likely you're going to have to touch my arms in some way. Yep. I know the refs at this angle can't see that I hooked my arm to your arm. It's a skill, which I think, like you said, fan bases could get frustrated, but I appreciate the fan bases that it may not be your favorite team, a favorite player, but you can respect what the player is doing, what the team is doing. You may not like it, but I respect it because I understand the game and they're actually doing a good job of manipulating what is needed to get to the free throw line. Cat from Jersey, me being from Jersey, seeing the conversations going back to Minnesota. This is the thing that I think where, and you probably would have more experience in this aspect than I would, but I think a lot of the players on a professional level don't like the media because they can sometimes let what is seen on X, not so much on Thread, but X and other places that have nothing to do with the game, get into how the players are treated, and they don't even want to have a conversation with certain people or even want to open themselves up to have those conversations where we have the deeper 4-page, 5-page article written down on Cat and his mother and his Puerto Rican and the Hispanic roots and all this stuff. You may not get that because of everything that happens social media wise.
Mhm.
I think it is important that we have these conversations of giving the flowers to these players so that, because people forget, these are still humans.
Right.
I get sick and tired of he makes $24 million. That don't mean that you could just say anything and everything about this player and it doesn't have any level of an impact. I completely agree. Cat, whether you like the voice changing or not, to be that tall, he's a very skilled player.
Yep.
Very skilled player. They laughed, and it was because, again, the voice changing. When he said he's one of the best, I think he called himself the best, but regardless, he's in the conversation. Like if we're being completely honest, forgetting voice changing, you don't like how he flails his arm, his wrist hangs this way, and your viewpoint and all of that. If we're being completely honest, it's one of the best big men of this generation.
Yep.
Like you said, fouls, defense, it leaves.
He's had like he has these moments where he just wants to be aggressive and get downhill. I mean, like I think somebody made this point a while ago. I can't remember who it was, but like the way his body's set up with his arm length is just kind of awkward, and so it leads to him just kind of just barreling through and everything. And I'll tell you what, man, we talked about Brunson and him getting calls. My Cat should be getting a lot more calls than he does. He just like when he goes into the lane, he just takes abuse, and um, that's especially going to be the case this year because it seems like they're going to have to go through Detroit, who has a really imposing front line, and yeah, I mean, you're talking about a guy who's 7 feet tall who shoots at volume 40% from three on his career, like that doesn't just happen, like maybe we've been a little bit spoiled by Jokic, right? That we just think that that's just the norm. Whereas like Jokic is about maybe what it's all done. One of the best 5 players to ever do it. It's just kind of crazy. But yeah, Cat's just like a tremendously skilled player that I think people take for granted. And I've posted about it, and Wolves fans have said, yeah, we miss him a lot. And so that's telling.
I think that'll be one of the players that we'll appreciate more once he retires, and we look
Yeah.
back at it and be like, "What he was putting up stats like this," and you go back and watch the games and see, oh, that was a tough play, and he could do this, and he could dribble, and he was able to have an up and under, and it's a lot. And sometimes we see that where players don't get appreciated till they retire.
Right.
Players don't get appreciated till you really take a step back and see, like, oh wow, such and such player was actually really good for that time. Hopefully, this is the important thing that I try to keep in mind is that you give people their flowers while they can still smell them. Like
Right.
you and others that actually watch the games, because a lot of people on threads and in social media in general don't actually watch the games.
Yeah.
They don't actually watch the games, but have analysis and full-blown think pieces off of what they saw in a box score.
Yeah.
For those that watch, I think is important to make sure that we give flowers to these players. The trade deadline is around the corner. Do you think the Knicks should be buyers, sellers, or stay pat?
Sellers to a certain, sellers/buyers to a certain degree. I don't think they're so close to second apron. There's so little that they can do. I think the big thing for them is going to be shipping out Gershon Yabusele. It just hasn't worked, and they signed him to just under the mid-level, I think, this offseason to stay under the tax. And, the idea was big coming off the bench. He could spell Anunoby or Towns and, hit threes, but he just hasn't gotten into the flow of the offense. It just hasn't worked out. There was a game recently where he got some minutes because there were some injuries. I think Cat was missing that game. And he was pressing so much. Like you watch it, anybody that's played, you could see when a guy has no confidence and is just pressing the issue, and he was doing that. Like every mistake was magnified, every missed shot more important because he just wants to get back in the good graces and be a good teammate here. And he actually likes being a dick. Like he's always posted like pre-game graphics on his Instagram or whatever. But I think he needs to change the scenery, and this team probably needs a little bit more of a reliable backup big. So I would probably look at that. The emergence of Tyler Kolek is interesting because a lot of the conversation in the Knicks sphere was like, yeah, you got to get a backup point guard at the deadline. Flip Yabusele for some point guard. But now with him kind of emerging and really being a little bit of Brunson light on offense, and these lineups with him and Brunson in the backcourt, which allows Brunson to play off ball, I feel like they're kind of set in their guard rotation, especially with McBride as well. So I would be probably looking for them to make a move on the margins to get a backup center, especially because you don't know how healthy Mitchell Robinson's going to be for the duration, and you don't want to have that happen, and then you're relying a lot on Jemison and Hawkporty. So yeah, so no big moves. I don't think a Giannis trade is happening or anything like that, but I think that if there's a backup big to be had, that they'll go after it.
I think that's vital because Mitch, I think, is like one of the underrated X factors when it comes to the Knicks. And it's just unfortunate that he hasn't been healthy because, I mean, I don't have the numbers, but if you look at the numbers, historically, he has to be one of the best offensive rebounders in league history. Like, I don't have the numbers, but from watching it, it's at least 5-6 possessions every single game that he's given extra just with his effort, and then his effort on the defensive side. I think he's such a vital piece to the Knicks and what they do. You don't want, obviously, we're having a deep playoff run. He's injured, and now, like you said, you're relying on somebody that doesn't even do half near what Mitch does. So I think that's one of the unsung heroes of the Knicks is Mitchell Robinson.
A while ago, I wrote a piece about Mitch, just a couple years ago, and it forced me to look into how high up the list could he get for offensive rebounder all time. And if you ever look at that list, you realize how insurmountable number one is. Number one is, if you don't know, is Moses Malone. And the sheer gap in between how many he accumulated versus the second person is insane. It's almost double what the second place person has. And so I think that's a record that's never going to happen. Also, I think I wasn't around to watch Moses in his prime, but I feel like there was a lot of juicing of that stat a little bit for him. But he's a fascinating person to kind of look into from his history. But Mitch, if he played more consistently and 30 plus minutes a night, he'd be in the top 10 all time in offensive rebounds. That's no way around it. But he's in like these 20-minute per game type of window, and they only really play him half the games because they want him for playoff time. That's when, which I get, the trajectory of their defense totally changes when he's out there. So I feel like Mike Brown's just playing the long game, and I honestly don't think it's so much that he's injured right now. I think it's just they're just kind of like, well, we're gonna deploy you here and there, but really be ready for the playoffs. And I think that's the logic. And you could agree with it or disagree with it, but I think that's probably the smart way to do it.
That's the most important part for the Knicks. This is not a 7th seed, 8th seed play-in team. This is a team that could exactly. This is a team that could actually get to the finals this year. So we need to be thinking about June possibly, even though we're in January. Sure. They're not the Chicago Bulls. That's a different timeline. Yeah. Before we get to our fourth quarter segment, to end off this episode, again, we thank you for taking time out your schedule. How can people support Omar? Where they can actually go read? Where can they actually, stay up to date with what you're putting out and what you got coming out?
Yeah, so a few different places. You could catch my podcast, which is called Deep Cover. That's on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. You can read my Medium pieces if you're a Medium member, medium.com/Omar-Zahran. If you don't want to pay $5 a month for Medium, you could also catch those pieces on a little bit of a delay on Substack. which is deepcover.substack.com. So you just subscribe for free and you get everything straight to your inbox, which is pretty cool. So that's, and you can also find me on Threads, Blue Sky. Those are the main two places that I post up.
Definitely check it out. Fourth quarter segment. I am a person that loves to eat food, so every single guest I have on, it is a food related question in some way, shape, or form. What is your favorite place? I said, what? Where is your favorite place to eat?
Oh man. So again, I'm probably cheating here, but I've lived in multiple cities, so I always I want to give like an example from each city. So um I grew up in New York City. So this is more of a sentimental pick, but I love Katz's. Katz's Deli, obviously, like famous from When Harry Met Sally, roast beef and pastrami and all that. So every time I'm back in the city, I go there with my dad now. So my dad's in New Jersey actually. He moved back a couple years ago, but yeah, we would love. I would love to love nothing more than have a giant ass sandwich from them right now. I lived in Jordan, which I mentioned, and there is a little like chain there called Laya, which is shawarma. And they're like the top shawarma place in Jordan, and they have like this thing called like Jordanian style, or Arabic style, which is imagine like a shawarma wrap but cut up in pieces, and then they have like a little dipping sauce, and you dip that into. Detroit, when I lived there, it's a weird one. So there's a place called Oak Diner that I discovered. It's kind of like imagine it's like a real small place. It has maybe 10 tables in it. It's like a breakfast spot. And they used to have or they probably still do. They had like all these like skillets or whatever. And I used to get like this LA skillet, which had like grilled chicken and avocado with egg and all that. Just incredible. And while my time in Seattle here, there's a bunch of them, but really any West Coast, Pacific Northwest teriyaki spot. It's just you get the chicken teriyaki, the spicy beef teriyaki. It hits different. Asian food here is incredible. I can't recommend it enough. So if you're ever in Seattle, find a local teriyaki spot, and you will not be disappointed. Mike.
Seattle is on my places to go. That's one of my list of places, most definitely, for the scenery, everything that they got going over there, and food. I heard Seattle is really good with food. I heard Detroit is underrated. People don't talk about Detroit enough. And I heard Chicago is one of the other places where it's like whatever you could think. Chicago is one of the places that has everything. So those are some places that are definitely on my list for sure. If you are starting a franchise and you have the number one overall draft pick and you're picking a Knicks player in their prime, what Knicks player would you pick with the number one overall pick?
And we're playing in today's league, right?
In today's league.
I think it'd be Clyde Frazier, honestly. I want to say Patrick Ewing, but we don't know what his shooting would have been like, just different era. I think Clyde has a game that translates all eras. Great ball handling, great defense, could shoot, take over games when needed, great facilitator. That'd be the guy. That'd be the guy I'd start my franchise with for sure.
Do you consider Walt as the greatest Knick? I know some Knicks fans have different opinions on that one.
I'm biased. I love Patrick Ewing. I'm always going to say Patrick Ewing. I think because of the championships, it's hard to deny both him and Willis Reed. But to me, if it's hard for me to say Patrick isn't the greatest Knick, but I'm incredibly biased. That was the Knick that got me into the team. But objectively speaking, yeah, you can make a very strong argument for Clyde.
I always find that interesting, and the people, Knicks fans now of this era, says if Brunson gets one, he shoots up the ladders to number one Knick. So that it's a story franchise. So that's the thing that I always find interesting with having conversations with Knicks, Lakers, Pistons, Celtics, those type of teams that have that historic background and they've actually won. That's interesting with this modern era where
Celtics is an interesting one, right? Because You could argue it's Bill Russell, right? That's probably the answer. And then it's Bird as a close second. But if Tatum gets another title or two, like you're gonna have to have conversations. Who's that number 3 guy? And the Celtics have had such a long history. I mean, with Kuzi and McHale and all these other guys,
Havlicek.
Havlicek. Yeah, they've had Rondo, Pierce, Garnett. They've had some great players. So they're a hard one to do. So I don't envy any Boston Celtics podcast who has to have that conversation. During the summer when there's no content to talk about NBA.
Most definitely for you, right? What NBA storyline currently right now do you feel is overhyped or underhyped?
The 65 game thing is a little over talked about, I think. I'm assuming that the league will probably address it eventually, especially if like you're probably going to miss out on players qualifying for awards and all that. I did hear an interesting theory that they should say that if for NBA third team, all NBA third team, because of the contractual obligations, that they shouldn't have the limit, so that if somebody is awesome but plays 62 games, right, that you put them in. As far as underhyped, I don't know if it's underhyped, but I think the ascendancy of the Spurs deserves more attention here. A lot of people are kind of just penciling this in as the Thunder's conference to lose. And it might still very well be that, but the Spurs are coming, and they're probably coming sooner than we thought. And so I think that that's something that deserves more attention. And also, another thing that doesn't have enough attention is the shit show that the Warriors are kind of becoming. The Kuminga thing's weird to me. It's like just trade him already, or as soon as you can trade him. I think because there's like an extension thing that limits it, but just get him out of there. And there's like this pressure to make them competitive in Steph's final years. Kerr's kind of been a little off the rails lately, with some of the stuff. It's like it's not being talked about that much, and which is weird because they're a pretty big brand that gets a lot of media coverage. But I think that's another thing that maybe is a little underreported right now.
Most definitely, those are some great ones that you brought up right there to end off our show, because you did talk about football. Because again, for those that's watching at this point, I told you, Omar could take it wherever you want to take it. Whatever sport you want to get into, he could take it where you want to take it. Super Bowl prediction.
So the timing of this is unfortunate for me because for the number of weeks, I thought that the Texans could make the Super Bowl. And I still feel that. But if they lose tonight, then I look like a complete idiot. But I'm gonna stick with it. I've watched both of the Eli Manning Giants runs. A lot. This Texans team reminds me a lot of those teams. Decent running game, a QB who can make big throws when needed, and just a suffocating defense that gets pressure with the 4 guys up front without having to send a blitz, and that wins in the playoffs. And if they could get pressure on guys, it's not this awesome lineup in the AFC. I have no problem saying that the Texans can make the Super Bowl. In the NFC, I've kind of been on the Rams for a while. They made me sweat it out the other day against Carolina, but there's also maybe a theory that Carolina just has their number. If you look at the remaining field, Seattle, I still can't really trust Sam Darnold in the playoffs until proven otherwise, to be honest. And San Francisco is just so battered, it's tough. And then the Bears are kind of like it's just like they got some voodoo going on there in Chicago, man. I don't know. It reminds me of Washington last year, to be honest, where they're just winning all these close games. So yeah, they can maybe get to the conference championship. But my pick's probably Rams, Texans. Knowing how things have gone, I'll probably be completely wrong, and it'll be Seahawks, Patriots or something. We'll see, but that's my pick.
Funny enough, I did one of those ESPN bracket predictions.
Right.
I did 2 of them. One of them I have Rams Texans. I think Rams Texans we could see it. Now, will we, with how the playoffs have been going and because of the playoffs? Who knows? I'm hoping.
Man, my gauge was so off this past weekend because I was like, all right, I really thought the Jags were going to beat the Bills because the Jags have a pretty good running game and the Bills have a terrible run defense. And it just, Josh Allen is Josh Allen, and that's just the way it goes, and the Chargers obviously were just so demolished that, they didn't matter. And I was surprised by the San Francisco Philly game. I thought Philly was going to win one game and then get knocked out the following round, but they just couldn't get it together, and that team I think it might be getting blown up in the offseason. There's just something feels off, with that whole dynamic with the coach and the players, and AJ Brown is 100% being traded, but it's just a weird dynamic, and they have a weird offseason ahead of them. And I thought the Packers would beat the Bears, and through 3 quarters I thought that was right, but like I said, they got this Bears magic that just happened, and here we are.
Hey, any Eagles podcast, y'all have more than enough to talk about before we have OTAs training camp. It's going to be a lot for the Eagles this offseason that they got to figure out. Howie Roseman and the crew got to figure out. It's a lot of questions that need to be answered, but everything so far in this episode was answered great. A lot of gems of wisdom. If you were listening, if you were paying attention, Omar blessed the pod, and the vibes here at the B&B podcast. If you stay ready, you don't got to get ready. Bench mob, we out. Peace.